I stood there in the hallway, the tray shaking faintly in my hands as my daughter-in-law's words echoed in my chest, like a slow-moving storm that hadn't yet decided whether it wanted to destroy me completely or simply bruise me for the rest of my life. The hallway suddenly felt too small, too narrow, like the walls themselves had leaned in just to listen to the moment my heart cracked open silently. You don't belong in this family. The sentence kept repeating in my mind like a broken song, each repetition cutting deeper than the last. The strange thing is that she didn't raise her voice. She didn't glare, she didn't show anger or frustration. She said it so casually, so plainly, as if she were stating the weather or reading a line from a grocery list. And maybe that's what hurt the most. Her ease, the way she dismissed me without hesitation, without guilt, without the slightest tremor in her voice. It was as if she had been waiting to say it, as if she had finally found her moment. My breath felt trapped somewhere between my ribs and my throat, and for a second I wondered if she could see the panic rising inside me, but I didn't let it show. Mothers learn early in life how to hide the earthquakes inside them. We smile when we want to scream. We nod when we want to fall apart. We swallow pain so quietly that even the walls of our home forget to echo our hurt back to us. So I smiled, a weak smile, a tired smile, a smile that came from years of surviving disappointments and keeping my grief tucked away behind my motherly patience. It wasn't the kind of smile that said I agreed. It was the kind of smile that said I've lived long enough to know life doesn't end with unkind words, even if it feels like it does in the moment. And maybe that's what she didn't understand, the strength of a woman who has given birth, raised a child, built a home from nothing, and held her family together with both hands during days when everything was falling apart. I stood there remembering the nights I stayed awake nursing Daniel when he was sick, the school mornings when he refused to wake up and we laughed about it later, the afternoons he came home with scraped knees and cried into my lap, the teenage years when he slammed doors but always apologized before bed. I remembered every moment of motherhood, all the small sacrifices, all the quiet victories, all the tears I hid and all the love I gave freely. And suddenly, the idea that someone, a newcomer to the family, believed she had the right to tell me whether I belonged or not, it felt absurd. But still, her words lodged themselves deep inside me like a seed of doubt that would take time to remove. My mind wandered through all the years I had spent creating this home, this space that smelled of cinnamon in December, felt warm in winter, and sounded like laughter on weekends. I thought of the meals we had eaten in the dining room, the arguments we had resolved in the living room, the birthdays celebrated in the backyard. Every corner of this house carried a piece of my heart. I planted flowers outside with my own hands. I painted the kitchen walls with Daniel when he was 15. I held my husband's hand on this very staircase during the hardest years of our marriage, and now someone was telling me I didn't belong in the very home I had poured my life into. I felt the clock ticking behind me, a slow, steady reminder that time doesn't pause for heartbreak. Each tick felt like a tiny hammer gently tapping on the inside of my ribs, pushing the hurt deeper. I wondered, just for a brief moment, if Daniel knew what his wife truly thought of me. I wondered if he would defend me or stay silent. I wondered if she had been slowly poisoning the air between us without me realizing it. The thought made my eyes sting, but I blinked the tears away because I refused to let her see me break. But just when I felt myself slipping into the quiet darkness of self-blame, the front door opened. The sound echoed through the hallway like a small miracle. My husband's footsteps entered the house, steady and familiar, like a rhythm I had known for decades. He walked in earlier than expected, almost as if fate itself had nudged him toward home at that exact moment. When he looked at me, really looked at me, his eyes didn't miss a thing. Not the trembling in my hands, not the strained smile, not the coldness in the air between his wife and his daughter law. He didn't ask what happened. He didn't need to. He could read emotions like other people read newspapers. He placed his bag down slowly, his eyes never leaving my face. Then he glanced at Rachel. His expression didn't change, but something in the air did. Something sharp, something powerful. He took one deep breath, and then, in the calmest voice I had heard in a long time, he said, "I think it's time you stop playing your games." The words hung in the air like smoke, thick and unexpected. Rachel blinked at him, her confidence faltering for the first time. She had never seen my husband speak like that. And truthfully, neither had I. His voice wasn't angry, but it wasn't soft either. It was controlled, the kind of tone a man uses when he's holding back everything he's discovered, everything he's pieced together, everything he's been watching quietly without saying a word. Because I brought proof, he continued, his eyes fixed on her. And I'm done watching you hurt my wife. Those words, those exact words, reached inside me and lifted something heavy off my chest. For months, I had felt alone, misunderstood, dismissed. For months, I had questioned myself, my tone, my actions, my intentions. For months, I had wondered whether I was imagining the tension, or whether my daughter-in-law truly disliked me as much as her eyes often suggested. But now, hearing my husband say he had proof, hearing him say he was done watching her hurt me, it was like someone had opened a window in a room I didn't realize was suffocating me. My daughter-in-law's face tightened, her lips pressing together as if holding in fear or frustration. She looked at my husband, then at me, then back at him. Her confidence slowly slipped, like a mask losing its glue. She opened her mouth to speak, but he lifted his hand slightly, a silent signal to stop. I studied him quietly, wondering what exactly he had discovered, what truth he was carrying inside that manila folder tucked under his arm, what evidence he had gathered while I was too busy trying to keep peace. I didn't know he was watching. I didn't know he was taking notes in that small notebook he kept on his nightstand. I didn't know he was connecting dots I hadn't even noticed before me. But I saw something in his eyes, a fierce protectiveness I hadn't seen since the early years of our marriage, back when he used to defend me in front of anyone who dared speak ill of me. It was the look of a man who had reached his breaking point, a man who had seen enough. In that second, something inside me stood up again, something I thought I had lost in the quiet battles of the past months. I felt supported, I felt seen, I felt like I had someone in my corner again. I wasn't alone, not anymore, and I knew that whatever truth my husband had brought into the house that day, it was about to change everything. I always believed that family was built on small moments, the kind that seem ordinary at the time but later become the foundation of everything you remember. Family wasn't the big celebrations or the perfect pictures. It was in the morning, cups of coffee, the mismatched mugs, the smell of toast, the late-night talks where the world felt quiet and safe, and the Sunday dinners where everyone talked over each other but somehow still understood every word. Our home was never fancy, never flawless, never the type you'd see in a magazine, but it was warm. It felt lived in, loved in, and every corner held a memory of who we were. My husband and I raised our son, Daniel, in that warmth, teaching him the values our own parents whispered into us: be kind, be honest, work hard, forgive quickly, and always remember where you come from, because roots matter, even when life tries to pull you away from them. Daniel grew up carrying those lessons in his heart. He was the kind of child who hugged everyone, even people he barely knew. He always noticed when someone was sad. He was the boy who offered his lunch to a classmate who forgot theirs, the boy who helped neighbors shovel their driveway before we even woke up, the boy who said thank you even when he wasn't the one receiving anything. He smiled easily, spoke gently, and trusted people too quickly, a trait that scared me sometimes. I worried the world might take advantage of his softness, but somehow he grew up with that same softness intact. It became a quiet strength in him, something that made people feel safe around him. He went to college only 2 hours away, close enough to come home often but far enough to taste independence. One afternoon, my phone rang, and when I answered, I heard a new kind of excitement in his voice. "Mom," he said breathlessly, "I met someone." I remember standing by the kitchen window, dish towel still in my hand, the sink full of soapy water, and smiling to myself as he talked. He used the kind of tone young men use when they don't yet realize they're falling in love. Her name was Rachel. He told me she was sweet, intelligent, strong, and funny in a quiet way. He talked about her like she carried sunlight in her pockets, like her presence made everything a little brighter. And as I listened, I felt a small hope bloom inside me, the hope that maybe, just maybe, this was the daughter I always wished for but never had. The first time she visited our home, I wanted everything to be perfect. I cleaned the housetop, Tabafta cooked a full dinner based on all the things Daniel told me she liked. When the door opened and she walked in, she was polite, quiet, observant. She looked around the house slowly, as though she were studying each room, not with excitement or curiosity, but with a careful kind of calculation, as if she were measuring whether she belonged or whether she wanted to. I tried not to take it personally. I reminded myself that young women today often carry insecurities like heavy coats. Sometimes they show warmth only once they feel safe. I served her pasta, garlic bread, and the chocolate cake Daniel claimed was her favorite. She thanked me. Softly, she barely touched her plate. I watched her politely move her food around, offering a small smile now and then. I told myself not to worry. People need time. The first visit is always awkward, like trying on new shoes that aren't broken in yet. But over the months, I saw the way she watched Daniel, not with the warm kind of love I expected. It wasn't admiration or affection. It was something sharper, tighter, like ownership, like she needed to shape him, mold him, control him, keep him close enough to touch but far from anyone else, especially me. Still, I stayed quiet. I thought maybe I was reading too much into things. Maybe I was imagining it. Maybe all mothers feel a small sting when another woman becomes the one their son listens to most when they got engaged. I hugged her, truly wanting to welcome her. I whispered, "Welcome to the family," and although she smiled, the smile never reached her eyes. It hovered on her lips like it had been practiced in the mirror, like she knew it was expected but didn't feel it. That was the first emotional shift, the first quiet moment when I felt something was off, even if I couldn't name it. The wedding was small, rushed, and felt more like an obligation than a celebration. There were no long hugs, no happy tears, no sense of two families blending. It felt like something they needed to get done quickly before anyone asked too many questions. After the wedding, they moved into our home temporarily, or at least that was what I believed. Rachel, however, treated the house like she had been living there her entire life. She reorganized the kitchen without asking, moving pots and pans, rearranging spices, and placing things where I couldn't find them. When I asked, she simply said, "This makes more sense," then without waiting for my response. She'd continued. She moved my plants to different corners because they looked better. She told me the living room walls felt outdated and suggested a different color. Sometimes I felt like a guest in my own home, tiptoeing around someone who should have been tiptoeing around me, considering it was my house. But I stayed quiet, because that's what mothers do when they're trying to keep peace. The second emotional shift. The invisible walls appeared when she started calling Daniel away every time he and I were talking. If we sat together for breakfast, she suddenly needed him to fix something upstairs or run an errand. If I asked him about his day, she would interrupt with, "Honey, remember what we discussed? Or we need to go, or we're late." I watched my moments with my son shrink, like fabric in hot water. Little by little, the walls grew taller, thicker, colder, and Daniel didn't even notice. He was caught between keeping his wife happy and trying not to hurt me. One night, when they thought I was asleep, I overheard them whispering. Rachel said, "Your mom needs to understand boundaries." Daniel answered with a soft frustration, "She's not doing anything wrong. She just cares." But Rachel insisted, "She's too involved." I feel suffocated. I stood on the other side of the door, frozen, my hand on my chest. I wondered if I truly was suffocating them, or if she was planting those thoughts in him gently, slowly, like someone watering a seed that would grow into a wall between us. Still, I stayed quiet. Because mothers swallow storms to keep peace. The third emotional shift. The distance began when Daniel started coming home later. He blamed work, meetings, traffic, anything he could think of, but I knew the tone in his voice. He wasn't avoiding me. He was avoiding conflict between me and his wife. He didn't want to choose. I didn't want him to choose. So I let the distance stretch, even though every inch of it felt like a small tear in my heart. My husband, normally calm and quiet, began noticing things too. He started writing things down, dates, receipts, conversations, in a small notebook he kept in his pocket. I didn't know why. I didn't ask. He just said, "Sometimes it's good to keep track." It worried me, but I trusted him. Every family has quiet storms that don't show themselves until the right moment. Then came the conversation that shifted everything again. One evening, Rachel walked into the kitchen where I was preparing dinner. Her voice was soft but carried a sharpness. Underneath, Daniel and I are thinking about building our own life, she said, and I hope you can give us space. I nodded, of course. Every couple needs their own life. Every marriage needs room to grow. But something in the way she said it made my stomach twist. She didn't say we needed space. She said I needed to give it as though I had been taking something that didn't belong to me. A quiet ache settled in me, the feeling of becoming an unwanted guest in a home I built, in a family I nurtured, in a life I raised with my own hands. And then came the morning everything changed. The morning that led to the sentence I will never forget. You don't belong in this family. 5 words that slice through every memory, every sacrifice, every moment a mother gives without expecting anything back. But what Rachel didn't expect was that my husband had been quietly collecting proof. And that morning, when he walked into the room holding that small worn notebook, everything we thought we understood begun to unravel. Everything started building from small things, the kinds of things most people shrug off, the kinds of things that look harmless at first, but slowly, quietly, painfully, stack on top of each other until they become too heavy to ignore. Small things don't stay small when they repeat every day. They grow roots. They become patterns. They become truths that hide in plain sight. And that's exactly how the tension in my house began, silent, creeping, disguised as misunderstandings, disguised as cultural differences, disguised as personality quirks. None of it exploded at first. It all simmered just beneath the surface, waiting for the day someone finally said it out loud. The silent attacks began the moment Rachel realized she could get away with them. First, it was little corrections, the kind that feel petty but are too small to start an argument over. If I folded the towels, she refolded them. Not later, not when I wasn't looking, but right there in front of me, like she needed me to see that her way was better. If I cooked dinner, she hovered behind me and added spisos, insisting she needed to fix the flavor, even when the recipe was something Daniel grew up loving. If Daniel hugged me after work, she frowned, her eyes narrowing in that way that told me she didn't like sharing any piece of him, not even the affectionate part meant for a mother. If I laughed too loudly in the living room, she sighed dramatically, as if my joy was an inconvenience she had to endure. These weren't accidents. They weren't misunderstandings. They were small, sharp attacks, wrapped so casually in everyday actions that calling them out would make me look hypersensitive or dramatic. One afternoon, as I was wiping down the kitchen counters, she stood there, arms crossed and voice flat, and said, "Your habits are old-fashioned. Daniel needs a modern home." It wasn't the words that hurt the most. It was the tone. The way she said old-fashioned, like it meant outdated, useless, embarrassing. It felt like she wasn't just criticizing the way I folded towels or the way I seasoned food. She was criticizing the woman I was. She was peeling pieces of me apart and calling them flaws. And the worst part was that Daniel wasn't home to hear it. If I told him, she would twist it, turn it into something else, and I would be the one accused of overreacting. So I swallowed it. I swallowed more than I should have. Then came the day my favorite vase shuttered, the one my mother gave me, on my last birthday before she passed. The vase had survived every move, every season of my life, every moment of joy and grief. I walked into the living room that morning and found it in pieces on the floor. Rachel stood near it, looking annoyed rather than guilty. She said she found it on the edge of the table, poorly placed. But I knew where I had set it. I had placed it in the center, far from any risk, because it meant something to me. The way she said poorly placed, with that little smirk, tugging at her lips, told me everything I needed to know. But what did I do? I stayed quiet, because accusing her would make me look paranoid. And if I said nothing, at least the house stayed peaceful. Or so I told myself. Soon after came something worse, the manipulation. Not the loud, obvious kind, but the subtle kind that happens behind closed doors, the kind you can't prove, the kind that makes you look like the villain even when you're the one hurting. She started twisting my words. If I offered a suggestion gently, she retold it to Daniel as if I had said it harshly. Once, I simply told her, "Let me help with dinner," in the kindest way possible. That night, Daniel approached me, his face confused, his voice soft, asking, "Mom, did you tell Rachel she's incapable?" My heart broke. I shook my head no, but even as I denied it, I saw the worry in his eyes, not because he believed her entirely, but because he didn't know who to trust. And that tore me apart. Daniel had never looked at me like that before. He was caught in the middle, pulled between the woman who raised him and the woman he married, and he was drowning under the pressure of choosing sides. He never wanted to choose. It hurt watching him like that. It hurt knowing he was being fed lies. It hurt knowing he was trying so hard to keep peace that he didn't see the storm forming. Then came the isolation, slow, deliberate, almost elegant in the way she executed it. She started planning outings without inviting me. They visited places we used to go as a family, the pier where we bought ice cream every summer, the park where Daniel learned to ride his bike, the cafe we visited every year on his birthday. They took pictures, smiling, laughing, creating memories without me. She erased my photos from the living room shelves and replaced them with her own, not all at once, one frame at a time, until the wall that used to tell our family story became a gallery of her. One day, she stared at my wedding photo, the one of me in my mother's veil, holding my husband's hand, with tears in my eyes, and she said, "Why do you still keep all these old memories around?" Old memories, as if my life began only when she joined the family. As if the decades I lived before her were inconvenient or embarrassing or irrelevant. The disrespect was subtle enough to dismiss but clear enough to wound. Then the breaking point, before the real breaking point arrived. Daniel forgot my birthday. My son, the boy who used to wake me up with handmade cards, who used to plan surprises, who used to remind me of the smallest dates, forgot, not because he didn't care, not because he was too busy, but because she planned a trip for the same weekend and told him it was important for their marriage. He called me 2 days later, voice low, apology whispered like a secret. But even in that apology, I could sense her presence, like she was standing at his shoulder, listening, controlling, prompting. His words sounded rehearsed, unnatural, like they were edited before they reached me. But my husband noticed. He noticed everything, the tension in Daniel's shoulders, the way Rachel answered for him, the way she inserted herself into every conversation, the way Daniel seemed scared to be alone with me, the way guilt simmered in him like a slow fever. And that was when he started paying attention in a way he never had before. He watched, he listened, he wrote things down, dates, comments, actions, tiny details that seemed random to me but somehow connected in his mind. He kept a notebook in his pocket, and every time Rachel made a remark meant to undermine me, or every time Daniel contradicted something he said earlier, my husband quietly jotted something down. I asked him once what he was doing, and he only said, "Sometimes the truth hides in patterns." I didn't understand, not yet, but I trusted him. Then came the morning, everything finally snapped. Daniel left early for work, kissing me on the cheek before rushing out the door. I was in the kitchen making tea, humming softly to myself, trying to start the day with some lightness, even though a heaviness had already settled in my chest. I heard footsteps behind me, and when I turned, Rachel stood there, arms crossed, expression cold, eyes sharp like polished stone. She didn't ease into her words. She didn't warm up with small talk. She simply looked at me like she was assessing whether she should bother explaining herself at all. Then she said it. "You don't belong in this family." 5 words, quiet, calm, emotionless. She didn't yell, she didn't argue, she didn't say it through tears or frustration. She delivered it like a statement of fact, like a verdict, like she had been waiting months to say it out loud, rehearsing it in her mind, polishing it until it sounded final. My breath caught in my chest, my hands trembled around the teacup. Everything inside me felt like it shattered at the same time. And yet, out of habit, out of motherhood, out of survival, I kept a smile on my face, a broken one, but a smile nevertheless. Mothers are trained to hold themselves together, even when someone is trying to destroy them. I opened my mouth to respond, but before I could form a single word, before the pain had even fully registered, before the air in the room shifted from cold to suffocating, my husband walked in. He didn't enter like a man unaware. He walked in like someone who had been waiting, listening, ready. He didn't ask what happened. He didn't hesitate. He looked at Rachel with an expression I had never seen on his face, a combination of disappointment, anger, and clarity. Then he reached into his pocket and pulled out the small notebook he had been filling for months. He held it in his hand like evidence. Because that's exactly what it was. Evidence, proof. that of everything she had said, of everything she had done, of every lie she spun out, of every manipulation, of every complaint she whispered behind closed doors, of every moment she pushed Daniel away from us, of every pattern she hoped we were too blind to see. And in that moment, that exact, heavy, undeniable moment, everything we thought we knew finally began to unravel. My husband stepped into the hallway slowly, deliberately, as if every step he took carried the weight of months of watching, listening, and staying silent. His face was calm, but there was something fierce simmering beneath that calmness, something sharp and steady in his eyes that I had not seen in years. It wasn't anger for anger's sake. It was clarity, the kind of clarity that comes when a person has finally seen enough. Behind him, the morning light spilled through the doorway, turning the whole hallway into a stage for a truth that had been concealed for far too long. He looked at Rachel the way a man looks at someone he has given too many chances, someone who has crossed the final line. And then his voice, steady, low, painfully controlled, broke the silence. "I think it's time we show some truth," he said. Rachel's eyes widened slightly, just a flicker, but enough for me to see fear slipping behind her usual confidence. She swallowed hard, and for the first time since she entered our home, since she began reshaping every corner of our lives, she looked nervous, not because she cared about us, but because she sensed the ground shifting beneath her feet. My husband reached into his jacket and pulled out a small folder, thin but heavy in its meaning. He held it like a man who had rehearsed this moment, who knew the weight of what he was carrying. My heart thumped so loudly inside my chest that I felt it in my throat, in my fingertips, in my trembling knees. Everything in the room felt suspended. The air, the tension, the unspoken truth, and even Rachel seemed to forget how to breathe. My husband opened the folder slowly, revealing pages filled with printed messages, screenshots, records, and photos, pieces of evidence, pieces of betrayal, pieces of the story I never knew was unfolding around me. He didn't look at me as he unfolded the truth. He kept his eyes on Rachel, as if she were the only audience he needed. "You've been playing with this family for months," he said, his voice steady but rough around the H's, like it hurt him to say the words out loud. Rachel took a tiny step back, her hands tightening at her sides, her lips parting as if she was searching for the right lie to shield herself with. But my husband didn't give her time to speak. He began reading from the first page, his voice clear and unwavering. And, as he spoke, the walls around me seemed to grow taller, pressing inward, trapping every breath in my throat. He read messages where she wrote to her friends things like, "Living with his parents will help me control him better." Words that pierced through me like shards of ice. I felt my chest tighten. Control him better meant to make him smaller, meant to push us out, meant to cut ties one thread at a time. She had written that I was too soft, that I was easy to manipulate, as if my kindness, the kindness I gave willingly, openly, lovingly, was a weakness she could exploit. The second set of messages were worse. She had told her friend that she was working on convincing Daniel that his parents didn't respect him so they would move out sooner. I felt the breath leave my body, not because I was surprised. I had sensed her pushing and pulling, bending moments into something they were not, but because seeing the words written down made everything real, undeniable, unchangeable. My husband flipped to another page, and suddenly the hallway felt colder. He played a recording, faint, muffled, clearly from an accidental phone call she must have made while whispering things to someone else. In that recording, her voice, that same soft, delicate voice she used when speaking innocent words in front of Daniel, dripped with manipulation, saying, "Once Daniel is fully dependent on me, I'll make sure his parents stay out of our lives." My knees almost gave way beneath me. The hallway blurred for a moment, my vision clouding with the sting of tears that had been waiting so long to fall. I reached for the wall to steady myself, my fingertips pressing against the cool paint as if it could anchor me to reality. Rachel's face turned pale, her eyes darting from my husband to me and back again. She stuttered, "These are taken out of context." The desperation in her voice cracked slightly, like a mask breaking down. But my husband shook his head slowly, firmly. "No," he said. "There is no context that makes this acceptable." His voice was no longer steady. It carried the exhaustion of months of watching her twist our home into something cold and unfamiliar. He reached into the folder and pulled out another sheet, a bank record. He looked directly at her as he handed it to her. "And this," he said, "is the money you withdrew from our joint account. Money you hid, money you never asked for, money you transferred to your private account." I felt something inside me crumble, not just because of the money, but because of the intentional secrecy behind it. Rachel opened her mouth again, but no explanation came out. My husband stepped closer, lowering his voice. "I kept quiet until I had enough proof," he said. "But when you spoke to my wife like that, when you told her she didn't belong in her own family, I knew today had to be the day." His words trembled with protective anger, with the kind of love that stands up when silence has gone on too long. Rachel's lip quivered. For a moment, a single, fleeting moment, her mask fell away completely. The woman beneath it wasn't confident or bold. She wasn't misunderstood or insecure. She was someone who had never cared for Daniel, not the way a wife should. She cared about control, about ownership, about building a world that belonged only to her. She whispered, almost to herself, "He was supposed to choose me, only me." And that one sentence, desperate, revealing, twisted, told me more truth than any screenshot ever could. Just then, the front door clicked open again. Daniel stepped into the hallway, still in his work clothes, confusion covering his face as he noticed the tension in the air. "What's going on?" he asked, his voice small, uncertain. My husband turned to him and handed him the folder, the whole folder, without holding anything back. Donald's hand shook as he opened it. He began reading the messages, flipping through the pages slowly at first, then faster as panic and hurt moved across his face like a storm. I watched my son, my gentle boy, break. His breath hitched, his throat tightened, his shoulders slumped. Tears filled his eyes, but not quiet tears. They were shaking tears, the kind that come from betrayal so deep it steals the ground from beneath you. He looked up at Rachel with disbelief and pain trembling in his voice. "Is this true?" he asked. "Did you really say all this? Did you really try to turn me against my own mother?" Rachel's tears came quickly, but they were not the kind that soften hearts. They were sharp, rehearsed, hollow tears, meant to gain sympathy, not forgiveness. She grabbed his arm, crying, "I was scared of losing you." But the words didn't sound like confession. They sounded like strategy. Daniel stepped back, pulling his arm away gently, but firmly. He shook his head slowly, wiping the tears from his eyes. "You already lost me," he said quietly. "The day you tried to take me away from the woman who raised me." His voice cracked on the last word, and my heart cracked with it. He turned toward me then, and before I even realized what was happening, he wrapped his arms around me. A long, desperate hug. A hug filled with apologies he couldn't put into words. A hug that told me the little boy inside him had finally woken up from whatever spell he had been under. I held him tightly, burying my face in his shoulder, breathing in the sun. I thought I had lost too emotional distance. My husband stepped closer and placed a hand on Daniel's back. For the first time in months, in maybe years, I felt my family in the same place again. Rachel stared at us, her face twisting between anger and panic. She took a step back, then another, realizing her game had ended. She grabbed her purse, her voice rising, shaky but sharp at the edges. "You're all going to regret this," she snapped. But her threat felt small, powerless, like a final attempt from someone who had already lost the battle she created herself. And then she stormed out of the house, slamming the door so hard the frames on the hallway rattled. The echo of that door closing felt like the closing of a chapter, one filled with quiet wounds and invisible bruises. The house went silent after she left, completely silent. Not the uncomfortable silence of tension, but the kind of silence that comes after truth finally breathes. The kind of silence that lifts pressure off a home like a weight slipping from tired shoulders. Danu sank onto the couch, burying his face in his hands. My husband sat beside him. I sat across from them, watching the two men I loved most in the world try to process the storm they had just walked through. But even in the heaviness, there was something else, something warm, something healing, something that felt like the first breath after drowning. The truth was out, and nothing, absolutely nothing, would ever be the same again. The days that followed the confrontation felt like stepping into a quiet house after a storm. The walls that once held tension now held silent, soft, gentle, and almost painfully peaceful. It wasn't the heavy silence that hangs over a home when people are avoiding each other. No, this silence felt like the house itself needed time to exhale, like the rooms had been waiting for the truth to come out so they could finally rest. Every morning, when sunlight slipped into the kitchen, the air felt a little lighter, as if the shadows that once crawled between us had finally been swept away. But healing doesn't show up with fireworks or applause. It comes slowly, through small moments that stitch themselves together until one day you notice your heart doesn't ache the way it used to. Daniel, my son, my sweet, loving, sometimes easily influenced Bobby, began showing up everywhere I turned. Not in an intrusive way, not in a forced way, but in the quiet, sincere way a child tries to make up for the hurt they didn't mean to cause. He came downstairs early just to sit with me at breakfast. He washed dishes even when I told him to leave them. He made sure the tea kettle never ran dry. Sometimes I caught him watching me with this expression that carried guilt, love, regret, and relief all mixed together. The kind of look a son gives a mother when he realizes she loved him far beyond what he ever understood. Every time he whispered, "I'm sorry," it landed differently. Not like the rushed apologies he used to give when Rachel stood hovering nearby, waiting for him to fall in line. These were apologies that came from the heart. Quiet, earnest, often trembling. I would brush his cheek the way I used to when he was a little boy and say, "You don't owe me anything, sweetheart. You came home. That's enough." Because truly, it was my husband, my steady mountain, the man whose silence often hides. The storms he refuses to show held my hand more than he had in years. He would walk up behind me while I cooked and wrap his arms around my waist, resting his chin on my shoulder like he used to when we were young. "You were never the problem," he whispered one night, as if saying it loud might break something. I leaned into him, feeling his warmth, feeling the truth in his words, because deep down, I had wondered. For months, I had wondered if I was the one who had changed, if I had become too much or too little, if motherhood had made me irrelevant in the eyes of the new generation. But hearing him say it, hearing his voice steady with conviction, it healed a part of me I didn't know had been bleeding. The house began to feel like a home again. There was laughter, gentle at first, then louder, freer, fuller. Daniel would tell us about work, about old memories, about silly childhood stories he had forgotten. And every time he spoke, I felt like I was being given back pieces of my son, one small moment at a time. The heaviness that once hovered over him was fading. I could see it in the way his shoulders relaxed, in the way he walked through the house without looking over his shoulder, without waiting for someone to correct him, scold him, or steer him. One evening, after a simple dinner that somehow felt like a feast because peace was sitting at the table with us, Daniel pushed back his chair and looked at me with eyes that glistened under the warm kitchen lights. His voice cracked just slightly, so slightly that another person might have missed it, but a mother never missed us those cracks. "Mom, I lost myself," he said. "I forgot who I was. I forgot what family means. I forgot that love isn't supposed to feel like fear or like walking on glass." His breath wavered, and he blinked hard. "Thank you for not giving up on me." In that moment, my heart broke and healed at the same time, because despite everything he had been through, despite everything he had unknowingly allowed to happen, he was still my boy, the one I raised, the one I loved, the one I would always choose even when he forgot to choose me. I stood and wrapped him in my arms, holding him the way I used to when he scraped his knee or woke from nightmares. "You will always belong here," I whispered into his hair. "This is your home. You are my son. Nothing can change that." After that night, it seemed like something inside him finally settled. His apologies became less heavy. His laughter became less forced. He began moving forward, not fast, not impulsively, but steadily, like a man who had learned the weight of trust and the value of truth. Months passed, and then one afternoon, Daniel sat us down in the living room. His hands were calm, his eyes were steady, his voice didn't shake anymore. "I filed for a divorce," he said. "I'm done living a life built on manipulation. I want to rebuild from the ground up. I want to be myself again." He looked at me and then at his father. "I want to be free." And for the first time since Rachel entered our lives, I felt a sense of closure, door gently shutting, not with anger, but with acceptance. Because the truth is, Not every person who marries into your family becomes family. Sometimes they come with their own storms, their own wounds, their own hunger for control. Sometimes they take more than they give. Sometimes they tear apart homes they never planned to honor. But blood, love, loyalty, roots, those are things that manipulation cannot erase. As weeks turned into months, I found myself reflecting on everything that had happened, not with bitterness, but with clarity. I learned that silence is not always weakness. Sometimes silence is survival. I learned that love is not measured by who stays during the easy days, but by who stands with you when the world tilts. I learned that even the strongest hearts can bend, bruise, and break, but they can also mend in ways you never expect. Most importantly, I learned that belonging is not something someone else gives you or takes away from you. Belonging is earned through years of love, sacrifice, forgiveness, laughter, tears, and countless moments of showing up even when you're tired, even when you're hurting, even when you are misunderstood. I belong in my family because I built it with my bare hands and my whole heart. I belong because I loved without keeping score, because I showed up, because I protected, because I forgave, because I stayed. And when Rachel told me I didn't belong, she wasn't speaking truth, she was speaking fear, insecurity, and a desire for control that had nothing to do with me. When my husband walked in that day with proof, he didn't just defend me, he reminded me of something I'd forgotten in the fog of hurt. I was never alone, not for a single moment. Even in silence, even in confusion. Even when I felt like a stranger in my own home, truth was quietly gathering its strength behind closed doors. Love was preparing its return. Loyalty was sharpening itself, and justice, gentle, patient justice, was waiting for the right moment to speak. In the end, our family healed. Not suddenly, not dramatically, but honestly. And sometimes that is the kind of healing that stays. Life didn't go back to the way it was before. It grew into something better, something more honest, more grounded, more aware. Daniel grew stronger. My marriage grew deeper. And I grew wiser, softer, and fiercer in ways I never expected. Because it's true what they say. Sometimes the people who try to break you end up teaching you how unbreakable you really are. And sometimes the moment that hurts you the most becomes the moment that sets you free.